Are you thinking about moving to the Oregon coast? Well, there's some towns that you might want to avoid. We're going to talk about it in this video. Stay tuned to learn more. Hey, what's up everybody? This is Clem with the Oregon Relocation Team coming to you from the Oregon coast. And I may have a cold today, but I'm going to talk about some towns on the Oregon coast that some people may object to depending on what you're looking for, what your circumstance is, but this is based on the most common objections that we get from people looking for homes, looking for what town they want to move to on the Oregon coast. Now, if this is your first time to the channel or you've been here and you haven't already and you want to get more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. Okay, so what are some of the main things that people want to avoid when moving to the Oregon coast? And what towns fall within those categories? Let's check it out. All right, let's talk about some of these Oregon coast regions and towns that just might not quite be worth it. Now, all of these areas that we're going to look at have some really, really great things to offer, and many of these could be wonderful opportunities for you as far as areas that you could focus on for your home search. But if we look at some of the biggest objections that people have to specific areas on the Oregon coast, we're looking at things like flood risks and tsunami risk. We're looking at areas that are just too expensive, or maybe not too expensive, but where your dollar just doesn't go as far. Not everybody wants to pay $800,000, $900,000, or $1 million plus for, 2 bedrooms and 1,300 or 1,500 square feet, which we'll look at some areas where that is the case. You're also going to be looking at areas that are inundated with tourism, which is going to be a very common thing up and down the Oregon coast. Tourism is huge everywhere in all Oregon coast towns, but there's going to be certain destinations where you're going to have a lot more of it, in particular in the warmer months. There's also going to be some areas on the Oregon coast that are just going to feel, or literally are, very isolated, whether that be you are far from the nearest town, or you are far from certain amenities, or you are far from being able to get to a larger, more populated area, far from access to an airport, things like that. So those are really the biggest concerns that we hear from folks. And we're going to talk about towns that fit within some of these different categories in this video. So I have my list here that I'll be working off of. You can see that my working title was Avoid Moving to These Oregon Coast Towns at All Cost. Yes, we do dabble in a little bit of clickbait. So again, there's nothing inherently wrong with these towns. These aren't literally places that you should absolutely avoid. But if these are things that you are concerned with, we want to be able to bring that to your attention, because the Oregon coast is very, very big. There are a lot of different areas that you could end up, or areas that you could focus your search on, and we want to make sure that you're being efficient in doing that right out of the gate. So what are the areas that are, just for whatever reason, going to be disqualified from your search based on some of these more common objections? So let's look at the tsunami zones. We have this map that's going to show how susceptible some of these towns are to major flood risk due to a tsunami. So I think with a lot of this stuff, we're going to be rapid fire here. So of course, if you want to talk about any of these different major objections that people have that we're talking about in this video, if you want to talk about some of these different towns or a combination of those things, obviously give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link down below in the description of the video, schedule a Zoom call with us, and we can dig into these topics a lot more. So again, we'll kind of run through all of these pretty quickly. But first and foremost, areas that are most vulnerable to flood damage from a tsunami. We're going to go, it looks like I have us listed south to north here. So starting south, we're going to look at Bandon. And there are certain areas on the coast that are more susceptible, that maybe have little to no residential development or population. So we're going to look at some of the actual towns and areas that are populated that also might have some vulnerability. So first, we're going to look at Bandon, and you can see all of these little black specks are houses, either commercial buildings or houses, right? So you can look at a lot of Bandon, you're up on this bluff here in town, and some of this a little bit inland. In this green area, it's categorized as outside known hazard area. So, who knows? There could be some vulnerability there. But these areas in yellow are where you're going to be vulnerable. So when you look at Bandon, this is all kind of right in town here, right at the Coquille River where it's coming out to the ocean. And you can see a lot of the main, the kind of the heart of Bandon, which a lot of this is commercial, but a lot of residential development here in this area too is going to be pretty vulnerable. So if you're looking at Bandon, this is an area where you at least, like all of these areas that we'll talk about, something you would want to have on the radar as far as where you are relative to these hazard areas, and also where the evacuation routes are. So that's something that for every town along the Oregon coast you can take a look at. So moving up the coast, this Coos Bay, North Bend area, not a ton of vulnerability here. I mean, this Barview, Charleston area, but so much of Coos Bay, North Bend here is at some relative elevation here really in town, so not a ton of vulnerability there. So we're going to continue north to Yachats, but if we look at Florence as well, you see so much of Florence is along Highway 101 here. You see all these little black dots. I mean, you see where it's like densely developed in Florence, and it's in this green zone. So it's really only Hasita Beach up here, which is really the only kind of beachfront development in Florence where you have this yellow, earthquake and hazard area. So Florence, I mean, relatively, protected by some elevation there. Okay, this is not loading very quickly. Sorry about that. So we'll look at this Yachats Waldport area. So north of Florence into Lincoln County. There's a pretty high elevation up above Yachats, so you can see where this green is. I mean, it climbs pretty quickly, and you do have some development up, at some elevation. But along the highway here on Highway 101, I mean, you can see everything west of the highway. Basically everything here in town in Yachats is, and south of the river as well, there's some vulnerability there. So Yachats, kind of a majority, of the land in Yachats is in this yellow area. Waldport, not quite as much. You have a little bit here west of the highway, probably more so this Bayshore area. So you have a dune right here, right along Oceana Drive, and everything, a lot of it at least, kind of inside of this dune area, I mean, is going to be vulnerable to, some of this risk here. And then you get at some elevation pretty quickly here. You can see that's a common theme, right, where you see the green and climb elevation. But Waldport is an area where there could be some vulnerability. We can just kind of rapid fire this, but Pacific City, Rockaway Beach, Manzanita, we can hop up there. I think it is important to consider the areas that we're not mentioning, say here like a Newport, north of Waldport. South Beach, some vulnerability, but so much of Newport, is in this green zone. So, technically, at least according to this map, outside of the known hazard area. Lincoln City, for the most part, it's going to be the same story. Some of this Nelscott, Olivia Beach area, and then up in Wacoma Beach. I mean, some of these areas right next to the ocean, you get a little bit of that yellow zone, but can quickly climb elevation and get out of the hazard area. And if we're going up to Pacific City was the next one, I mean, you can see here really what I'm looking for in areas that are worth pointing out, where there is, or at least appears to be, some relative risk, is where you have kind of the town center and a lot of the surrounding immediate area in this yellow hazard area. So, this is Pacific City right on the Nestucca River. So you have a lot of water here, right? And you can see so much of Pacific City is going to be pretty vulnerable. And that goes for this Tierra Del Mar area too, just up the highway from Pacific City. Moving north, we're going to check out Rockaway Beach, which is really flat. Probably the most flat stretch of oceanfront you get in it in terms of an Oregon coast town. And it gradually climbs elevation. You see you get all the way back toward like kind of the end of town to the east, kind of the easternmost built up area as far as any residential development. This is a pretty high elevation up in here where you see that, but I mean, basically all of Rockaway Beach is in this yellow hazard area. So easy enough to, go up one of these streets, access the evacuation zone, or route rather. But definitely worth pointing out, the majority of Rockaway Beach is in this yellow zone. A couple more to point out here. Manzanita, Cannon Beach, Arch Cape, Seaside, Gearhart, Warrenton. So pretty much everything north, in Clatsop County. Manzanita here. I mean, you can see just the majority of Manzanita is in this yellow zone. Arch Cape, kind of similar to Rockaway Beach, as far as just the kind of this straight stretch of 101. The highway's up a little bit higher from the sea level than you get in Rockaway Beach, but either way, just kind of this sliver of residential development west of the highway that appears to all be vulnerable, in terms of being in this hazard zone. Similarly, Cannon Beach. This is the south side of Cannon Beach, Tullavana Park, and then Cannon Beach. I mean, you can see basically everything within the city limits in this yellow hazard area. That's going to be the same for Seaside. Here, Gearhart, just north of Seaside. These two towns are basically connected. And then Surf Pines, Sunset Beach, you have residential development throughout this stretch here that's all going to be pretty vulnerable, all the way up to Warrenton here, and then Astoria across this Youngs Bay from Warrenton. Little bit of vulnerability, kind of right along the water. But all of this is a big hill in town in Astoria, so you can, I think, climb the hill pretty easily. So not as vulnerable, at least there in Astoria. So those towns, I mean, all of those areas, it definitely should be something that's on the radar. So many people say they want to be at least in an area that doesn't have as much risk or where you're as vulnerable necessarily. So when you're looking at these towns in particular, I think it's important to look at, okay, where does a house sit in town? Where's the evacuation route? And really just take that into consideration as far as, is this an area where you could see yourself living? Is this something where you feel comfortable, or do you feel like, is it going to be in the back of your head 24/7? Okay, moving right along here. I think one of the next biggest objections that we get from people, and maybe not directly an objection, but obviously anybody wants to be able to stretch their dollar as far as it can go. Everybody's circumstance and considerations are going to be different. For some people, it's not going to matter as much. Even if you have an infinite budget, some people do have a hard time with some of these price tags. So if we look at the most expensive areas on the Oregon coast, these might be your favorite, and these are wonderful towns. But if you are looking to stretch your dollar as far as it can go, these aren't necessarily the places that I would recommend being at the top of the list. First and foremost is Cannon Beach, super popular town. Draws a lot of people from Portland. You can see you go out Highway 26 from Portland, and you can get to Cannon Beach in like 90 minutes, depending on where in Portland you're coming from. But kind of an upscale feel to it, really quaint, cozy town. I think with Cannon Beach, one of the biggest draws is this main street, this Hemlock Street in town, where you have so many great restaurants and shopping, and it's always very lively and bustling, which is something we'll talk about more here in a minute. But I think ultimately, the biggest thing with Cannon Beach, if you're looking at relocating to the Oregon coast, and same with all of these other towns that we'll talk about in this category, is it's just outrageously expensive. The median sale price so far in 2024 is $960,000. Interestingly enough, a couple of these properties that came up first, 2,000 square feet, 5 beds for $600,000. That's a screaming deal for this part of the coast. But if you look at just the typical homes in Cannon Beach, 2.7 million, 3.1 million, 1.5 million, 1.5, 1.85, just down the line, 2 beds, 1,300 square feet for $820,000, and, not necessarily the most updated home either. This is about what you could expect. So it's an incredible area. And in some ways, I think you can definitely justify the prices. But if you're looking purely just for beachfront and the coastal aesthetic and, a lot of the things that Cannon Beach has to offer, you don't necessarily need to be in Cannon Beach to get that. And certainly don't need to, to pay that price tag. So Arch Cape is another one. So Arch Cape is just south of Cannon Beach, $825,000 median sale price in 2024. And, there's only 11 homes in Arch Cape right now for sale, but 6 million, 2.3 million, 1.3 million, 2.6 million, you kind of get the idea. Here's a 3-bed, 2,400 square foot home for $900,000. It doesn't really have that oceanfront element as much as some of these other ones that are going to really carry that big price tag. And then south of Arch Cape, Manzanita, $910,000 so far in 2024 median sale price. You can get a little bit more of a range here. You can definitely be under that median sale price and find something, but again, you go down the line, 850, 775, 900, 1.2, 1.3, 1.7, 1.2. Homes are just going to be more expensive here. If you look at a map, so Cannon Beach, Arch Cape, and Manzanita, are just, say, from north to south in this case, down Highway 101 in succession. So, this whole corridor here, the most expensive on the Oregon coast for sure. And they're wonderful areas. I think you look into it more if you spend some time there, you can kind of see why. But at the same time, it's not going to be necessarily a match for everybody. Gearhart, similarly, it's going to skew more expensive so far in 2024. $878,000 as a median sale price, and you can see in Gearhart too. You can get some better deals, especially this Gearhart East area, east of the highway, or if you are just west, just inside of 101 in here, you can get some better deals. It's really this development here, closest to the ocean, furthest west in Gearhart, that's going to be the most expensive. But, 500,000, 530, 520. You could find some relative affordability in Gearhart, but $810,000 for 2,000 square feet, $720 for 2,000 square feet, and then you can see, you can find some of these, the 2.2 millions and the 1.2 millions, and so there is some nice bigger kind of luxury style homes, or you have a lot of really cool old architecture too. You have these old homes that are kind of have this historic feel to them in Gearhart as well. But odds are in Gearhart you'll be spending a little bit more than you would elsewhere. And similarly, Oceanside too, like Gearhart, you can get a little bit more of a range, but there's a particular type of property, or rather a particular type of dynamic that properties in Oceanside can have, where in Oceanside here you have kind of this beach level and then rapid elevation climb. So all of these homes, like up on this hillside, have just an incredible view of the ocean. So 1.4 million, 1.2. You see some lots here for sale. Here's a lot for $380,000, just the lot itself. So there's definitely a lot of opportunity to spend a lot of money in Oceanside. And the median sale price in Oceanside so far this year is $775,000. So if you look at all of these northern coastal counties where each of these towns are, Clatsop County and Tillamook County, the median sale price overall is $500,000 for 2024 so far. So when you look at 775 up to 910, 960, when you think of a median, if you look at the median sale price and think about what you get for that price, it's typically like kind of a starter home, maybe even borderline fixer-upper in some cases, something that's like you would expect to be anywhere from maybe 1,300 square feet to 2,000 square feet, 2 beds, 3 beds, maybe 4 bedrooms, but something a little more kind of modest overall. So when you look at these price tags for the median sale price, what you're getting for that number is kind of a smaller, more modest home. And then obviously you saw some of the prices well up over $1 million, over 2, 3, 4 million, for some of these homes. Okay, next we'll look at a map and talk about some areas that are a little more isolated, which is, a really big objection, for folks that we're talking to. So many people that we work with are coming from larger, more populated areas. Even if you're coming from a town of 50,000 people, that in and of itself is like, 5 times some of the largest towns on the Oregon coast. More often than not, again, even if you are coming from a town of like 50,000 people, you might be in a metro area. You still might be 20, 30 minutes from, a big city or an area that has 100,000 or 300,000 people, for example. So all of the Oregon coast is going to be relatively isolated compared to where you're coming from. It's just, very safe bet. And a lot of that is because you have this coastal range all the way, north to south, separating this I-5 corridor in Western Oregon and this Highway 101 corridor along the coast. So this coastal mountain range, you can see like these little town names: Mapleton, Scottsburg, Siletz, tiny little towns, but more often than not, just rural development, kind of along the highways. 99% of this coastal range is undeveloped. So there's really nothing there. So, if you live on the coast and you live along Highway 101, you're going to be at the very least an hour, to get over to Salem or Eugene or to Portland, depending on where you live on the coast. But, probably more like 90 minutes, maybe a couple of hours, depending on where you live and traffic, time of day, time of the year, things like that. So we're going to look at some of the areas on the Oregon coast that are more isolated, that if that is an objection for you, maybe you just kind of forego looking at these areas, or again, at least it's something that, we can talk more about. But I have Yachats, Brookings, Gold Beach, Pacific City, Port Orford, and Reedsport. Most of these towns are on the southern Oregon coast. So the southern Oregon coast as a whole is more removed from, access to more populated areas, let's say, and a lot of amenities, in your immediate area that you might have on the central or northern Oregon coast, because they are more populated, more dense, and with access to more populated areas like Eugene, Salem, and Portland. So Yachats, let's take a look at that one first. This is in Lincoln County, the southernmost town in Lincoln County. And you can see that if you look east, you have Eugene down here, and then Corvallis, Albany here, if this will load. Albany, and then Corvallis here. So, collectively here, maybe 100,000, a little over 100,000 people between these two towns. And then Eugene has I think well over a couple 100,000 people between Eugene and Springfield. But the point being here is that you see Yachats, there's not a highway in the immediate vicinity going due east, to get back over to this I-5 corridor. You're also like a solid 45 minutes north of Florence. Florence is one of the larger towns on the Oregon coast, call it 10,000 people. And, there's going to be more there, like a hospital and shopping and things like that. And actually this drive from Yachats to Florence is one of the toughest drives to make. You can just see how the highway kind of winds around Heceta Head and then Cape Perpetua here. It's very windy. You have to drive very slow. Anyway, getting to the kind of the next town south is not all that easy. And then Waldport is only like 8 miles north, but that's a small town in and of itself. You can get from Waldport along Highway 34 over to Corvallis, but that is a windy, tough drive. Realistically, you would be going to Newport, which is like, 30 plus minutes north, to then take Highway 20 over to Corvallis. But the point being is that, you're kind of buried here in this little section of 101, and it's a super small town in and of itself. So, Yachats might be an area that's going to feel more isolated. Pacific City was the other town up north. It kind of has a similar dynamic where, yes, you have 101 right here. You can see it's a little removed from Highway 101. You can get up to Highway 22, kind of wind through here to Highway 18, and then take that back north through this. This is largely like wine country through here, and back up to Portland, or 22 will go all the way over to Salem. So it's not terrible, like getting over to this I-5 corridor, but it's kind of like Yachats in that, the next largest town north or south is kind of far away. 30, 40 minutes to get up to Tillamook on Highway 101 here. Tillamook has like maybe 6,000 or 7,000 people, so it's one of the larger towns. And then south of Pacific City, you would get down to Lincoln City. Again, maybe 30 minutes or so. So being in Pacific City, and like Yachats, Pacific City is a smaller, less populated area, so there's less in the immediate area. Getting to the larger coastal towns is going to be more of a challenge. And then getting over to, this I-5 corridor is going to be potentially more of a challenge too. The rest of these areas that are going to be more isolated are pretty much all going to be on this southern Oregon coast stretch. Reedsport was one. Kind of a similar feel in that it's a smaller town with less to offer in the immediate area. To some degree, it's bigger than Pacific City and Yachats. More restaurants, more shopping, grocery shopping, things like that. But you're a good 20 plus minutes north of North Bend, Coos Bay, and then, maybe 30 minutes south of Florence. And then you do have a highway going over to Eugene. Well, really to Cottage Grove, but then up to Eugene. But that's like, maybe 90 minutes from Reedsport going back east. So Reedsport, a little bit isolated. Coos Bay, North Bend, south, or the southern coast is the least populated, kind of most isolated and spread out area. But North Bend and Coos Bay is the most populated area on the Oregon coast. So between these two towns, there's like 25,000+ people. So that's kind of a contradicting dynamic a little bit. But you go south of North Bend and Coos Bay, you get into Bandon, still kind of connected to Coos Bay in this Coos County area. So it doesn't really feel all that isolated. Just a little small coastal town. But once you get down to Port Orford, this probably is the most isolated area. Port Orford on the coast, because you would have to get all the way north to Coos Bay, North Bend, to get to a much more populated area. But then you would have to go all the way to Reedsport and then all the way, up to Eugene to get to like a city. And that's going to be a pretty long drive. Well over 2 hours. And then south, you have Gold Beach and Brookings. Gold Beach, small town, about 30 minutes north of Brookings. I mean, Gold Beach is really going to be pretty isolated too, but like Gold Beach has the Curry County Hospital, for example. Gold Beach feels like a bigger town than it is population-wise. But either way, this whole stretch of 101 is going to feel very isolated. Once you get closer to Brookings, another one of the larger towns on the Oregon coast, there is more there. It's a little bit less frequented as far as some of the tourism stuff, so it doesn't have as many of those amenities to cater to that aspect of things, at least to some degree. But you do have like grocery shopping, and it does feel like a little bit of a larger town, bigger community overall. And because of that, maybe feels a little bit less isolated. You're also, getting into California, you can get down to Crescent City, which I know a lot of people in Brookings will go down to Crescent City to get to like the Home Depot, for example. So you do have little more. So you do have a more populated area to the south, but and more population in Brookings. But this stretch, Curry County, Port Orford, Gold Beach, Brookings, it's going to feel pretty isolated compared to what you can get on the central and northern Oregon coast. Okay, finally, let's talk about areas that are overrun with tourism, or at least have the potential to be overrun with tourism, during the warmer months of the year in particular. Tourism is the biggest industry on all of the Oregon coast across the board. So there's going to be tourism, short-term rentals and condos, vacation rentals, and hotels, and people coming and going all the time. That's just going to be part of the experience of living on the Oregon coast. But I think the biggest thing to look at, and I didn't actually think about this, when I was writing out this list, but probably the biggest way to look at this is the drive-in distance to the most populated areas of Oregon. And the most populated area of Oregon, by far and away, is the Willamette Valley. So you have Portland to the north, Salem. We talked about Corvallis, Albany. I mean, again, another 100,000 people there, down to Eugene. And then there's southern Oregon, Roseburg, kind of a small town. This Medford, Central Point area. I think there's well over 120, maybe 150,000 people, definitely between Grants Pass down to Ashland. I mean, there's some people there, but I digress. Willamette Valley here is where everybody in Oregon is. So if you're looking at a drive-in distance to the Oregon coast, where most people are going to, it's going to be Astoria, Seaside, Cannon Beach, Manzanita, Rockaway Beach, Pacific City, Tillamook, Depot Bay, Newport, Yachats, Florence. Really, this whole stretch, this whole corridor, I think, is where you're going to experience far more tourism and busyness from tourism than you will south of Florence, let's say. And even Florence, I mean, I spent a ton of time in Florence. I'm there a lot in the summer. It's just, I don't know, it's bigger, it's more sprawled. It's like an hour from Eugene, and there's a ton of people in Eugene, so you get a lot of people coming out from Eugene to visit Florence, but it doesn't quite feel as busy necessarily as some of the towns up north. So Florence is a little bit of a mixed bag, or I guess, let's say maybe not quite as bad in regards to tourism as some of the towns up north. So let's leave Florence off the list here. Yachats, small, dense town. When there's a lot of people there, I mean, you got to drive really slow through town here on Highway 101 because everyone's crossing the street all the time. People are out walking around. Waldport, it's going to be much more under the radar. This Bayshore area is really cool. You might have a lot of like second homes in there. There are some Airbnbs and things like that, but definitely on a smaller scale in Waldport. If you want to visit the Oregon coast and not necessarily be amongst a lot of other tourists, Waldport's a good place to stay. Or if you want to move to the central Oregon coast and maybe avoid some of the tourism, Waldport would be a good candidate for that. But I mean, Newport might be the tourism capital of the Oregon coast. This bayfront, this Yaquina Bayfront, super cool down here. And then Nye Beach, this is all like a very, very touristy area. But in Newport, I would say you can get east of town here, up above the bay. This feels a little more like suburban in here almost even, than touristy. Similarly, north of town, this is just going to be like more local residents primarily on the north side. Depot Bay is kind of like Yachats in that it's very dense, and you definitely get people who live there full time, but you have this little ocean frontage area in town along here, little restaurants and stuff, and maybe people don't stay in Depot Bay as much, but a ton of tourism, people stopping in here, whale watching capital of the Oregon coast, so you get a lot of that in Depot Bay. Lincoln City is kind of like Newport in regards to tourism, but you don't have that like concentrated bayfront or beachfront kind of entertainment district necessarily. It's just this long stretch, but a ton of vacation rentals and things like that on the west side of the highway in particular. And all this beach in Lincoln City brings a ton of people from Salem, from Portland, and from all around. But definitely Lincoln City is very big on tourism. 101 can get very backed up. Traffic can get very heavy, on the weekends and the summers in particular. So, you'll definitely get your share of tourism in Lincoln City. So not to drag this out too much, but Pacific City, big tourism spot for the Oregon coast. And then, of course, up north where you have kind of the quickest, easiest access from Portland, by far and away the most populated part of Oregon. People are getting out to Tillamook to go to the creamery, to get ice cream and stuff like that. But, from Tillamook, really people are getting out to Oceanside and Netarts here. People are going to Rockaway Beach, very popular destination for little weekend trips and things like that. Same with Manzanita. Same with Arch Cape and Cannon Beach, and Seaside and Gearhart. I would say Oceanside, Seaside, Cannon Beach. You'll get a lot of people driving out here just for the day, because it is so accessible from Portland. So people will drive out to Seaside or Cannon Beach, spend the afternoon, and drive home from Portland. So these areas can get really, really kind of overrun with tourists in a lot of the high season. And then Astoria, really big on tourism too, but kind of has its own like culture and feel to it. It's not a coastal community, as much as these other towns that we've talked about are. Pretty easy to get to from Portland, whether you go out through Seaside or go up this Highway 30 here along the Columbia River. But Astoria feels like almost more urban, more dense. This downtown area almost feels like a little Portland in some ways. So, super old town, rich in history. Again, a little more eclectic, almost a little more of a Portland cultural feel, with the breweries and things like that. So definitely a different vibe, but it's definitely going to bring the tourism, because of everything that it does offer. Again, despite being different than, say, like Seaside that has like the t-shirt shops and the arcade and the bumper cars and things like that. You don't get that as much in Astoria. You get more like, a lot of really good restaurants and historical tours, and you have this, this mouth of the Columbia River, which provides its own, unique topography and kind of scenic experience. All right, I said we were going to be quick, and here we are 40 minutes later, but these are some of the things that, again, we hear from people most often as far as things they want to avoid or things that are top of mind as far as what their concerns might be. Tsunami zones and evacuation routes, expensive areas where it's just not going to make as much sense to look, or just having an understanding of, okay, if I like this area, it might take a little more in terms of budget to get what I'm looking for. Areas that are going to be isolated, whereas really all of the Oregon coast has a relatively isolated feel. There are specific towns in particular that really can feel very isolated, and tourism. A lot of people just don't want to be up against tourism in their day-to-day life, and there's going to be towns where it's going to be more prevalent. There's going to be parts of those towns where it's going to be more prevalent too. So if these are things that you want to talk about, if there are concerns or objections that you have that aren't addressed on this list, or if you're thinking about moving to the Oregon coast and you just want to talk about what that might look like, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link down below in the description of the video. Schedule a Zoom call with us. We can dig into it some more. If this video is helpful, make sure to hit the like button. That helps us out a lot. If you want to get more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. As always, we really appreciate you watching, and until next time, we'll talk to you later.